You're serious? My voice quavered, thin and sharp, as I stared at Richard from across the living room. The late afternoon light slanted through the blinds, striping the carpet between us, but his face was shadowed and unmoved. You want me to give you $3,000, on top of the $4,000 I already give you every month? He leaned back in his battered recliner as if he owned the world, arms folded across his chest, chin lifted. He looked like a king on a crumbling throne, holding court in a kingdom built with someone else's sweat. I need a new car, he said, his voice flat and cold, as if he were reading a grocery list. The old one's falling apart. I don't see what the big deal is. You've got the money. My chest tightened, anger and disbelief threading through my veins. The big deal, Richard, is that I've already given up enough for this house. I pay the bills, the groceries, your utilities. I even helped pay off Adam's credit cards. And now you want me to buy you a car? Yes, he snapped, his eyes narrowing, a flush rising in his cheeks. Because I deserve it. I've done enough for this family. It's time for you to pull your weight. Pull my weight. The words hit like a slap. For years, I'd been the invisible engine turning inside this household, working overtime, scraping by, sacrificing vacations and dinners out just to keep us afloat. Meanwhile, my father-in-law and Adam, my husband in name only, treated my paycheck like it was theirs by birthright, their needs always urgent, always more important than my own. I felt the sting of resentment, old and fresh at the same time, as if all the years of silent compromise had finally sharpened into a blade. I'm not doing it, I said, forcing my voice steady despite the quiver that threatened its edges. You'll have to figure out another way. His face contorted, lips curling into a sneer, the vein at his temple pulsing. You're just like your mother, always thinking you're better than everyone else. He pushed himself up from the recliner so abruptly that it rattled against the floor, and in that instant the room seemed to shrink. His movements were sharp, threatening, a warning I'd seen before but never like this. Don't you dare disrespect me in my own house, he barked, stepping closer, looming over me. Your house, I managed, my voice trembling but refusing to break. This house is paid for with my money, Richard. It all happened so fast. His hands on my shoulders, the hard, shocking shove. My feet slipped on the polished wood, the world spinning out of control. I tumbled backward, pain bursting through my body as I hit the stairs. I crashed to the bottom, a heap of twisted limbs and throbbing aches, my arm bent at a wrong angle, my head ringing. For a long moment I couldn't move. The pain was everywhere, blooming beneath my skin, and tears stung my eyes as I fought for breath. Above me, Richard glowered down, his face hard and unrepentant. That's what happens when you don't respect me, he spat, the words heavy with contempt. He turned and stomped back into the living room, the echo of his anger lingering in the air. Waited. Surely Adam would come running, would rush to my side, would help me up, check my injuries, hold me. Instead, he appeared at the top of the stairs, hands in his pockets, his expression flat and indifferent, as if he'd stumbled on me making a mess in the kitchen rather than lying broken on the floor. You should have just given him the money, Maya, he said, his tone bored, almost annoyed. You know how he gets. That was it. No concern, no outrage, no love. Just blame, just resignation, as if my pain was an inconvenience he'd rather ignore. My name is Maya, and for the past 4 years, my life has been narrowed down to this. The silent, invisible labor that kept a household running, a family that only saw me as a resource. I married Adam because I believed in partnership, in building something together. I thought we would create a home defined by love, by shared responsibility. But I was wrong. The only life Adam cared about was the one that orbited his father, a world where my role was to provide, endlessly, unquestioningly. When Richard's health started to fail, I agreed to move in to help out. Those were the words Adam used, softening the reality. What it meant was that I took on everything. Rent, utilities, groceries, even Richard's medical expenses, prescriptions, and snacks he claimed were for his condition. Adam quit his job under the guise of caregiving, But I was the one who worked late, missed lunches, pinched pennies. I became the backbone of a house that never once thanked me. At first, I told myself it was temporary, a rough patch, a sacrifice for the greater good. I convinced myself that Adam and Richard appreciated me, even if their gratitude was wordless. But as the months turned to years, their sense of entitlement grew. Adam slipped deeper into passivity, Richard made louder and more frequent demands, and my own needs shrank to nothing. Every time I tried to assert myself, suggesting Adam look for part-time work, asking Richard to contribute more, their resentment surfaced, sharp and unmistakable. Still I stayed. I kept telling myself I was doing it for the family, that things would change, that my loyalty would eventually be recognized. But lying at the bottom of those stairs, bruised and aching, clarity finally broke through the numbness. This wasn't family. It was a transaction, and my value was measured by the size of my bank account. I felt something inside me snap, quiet but irreversible. I was done. That night, after the house had gone still, I packed a bag. I moved slowly, my body protesting every movement, but I let the pain remind me of what I'd endured, what I could no longer tolerate. I didn't say a word to Adam or Richard. I gathered my essentials, my wallet, phone, laptop, a few changes of clothes, and walked out the front door, my heart pounding, fear and relief warring inside me. I didn't know exactly where I was headed. I only knew I couldn't stay. The betrayal, the violence, the casual dismissal, I wouldn't let them define me. I found a motel, checked in, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my shaking hands. The weight of the past 4 years pressed down on me, but I refused to let it crush me. For so long I'd been their safety net, catching every fall, smoothing every crisis. Without me, the whole structure would collapse. And this time I was done saving them. The next morning, with the pale sunlight filtering through cheap curtains, I made the call that would change everything. "Angela," I said when the lawyer picked up, my voice steady for the first time in ages. "I need your help. It's about my husband and his father." Talking to Angela felt like emerging from underwater, a gasp of air after too long holding my breath. She listened, really listened, as I laid out the truth. The bills, the debts, the relentless demands, the way Richard had escalated to violence, how Adam had stood by, indifferent. "You've been supporting your husband and father-in-law entirely on your own?" Angela's eyebrows shot up, her voice tinged with disbelief and a flash of anger on my behalf. I nodded, feeling both exposed and vindicated. "For the past 4 years. Every expense, every bill, it all comes out of my pocket." "And your name is on the mortgage or deed?" she asked, flipping through her notes, her fingers steady, her voice decisive. "It's all in my name," I said, and for once I felt the weight of that fact in my favor. They couldn't qualify for the loan without me. "Pay for it. I own it." Angela's lips curved into a small, satisfied smile. "Then this is your house, Maya. Not theirs. We'll start with eviction papers for both of them. And after that, we'll talk about what you're owed." For the first time in years, I felt something like hope stirring inside me. I thought about all the ways I'd tried to make this family work, all the ways I'd shrunk myself to keep the peace. Now, with the help of someone who saw my worth, I was reclaiming my life. One step, one signature, one brave decision at a time. I wasn't just walking away from a house built on resentment. I was choosing myself. And for the first time I knew I wouldn't look back. Evicting Adam and Richard made my stomach twist itself into knots I didn't even know were possible. The guilt was sharp and immediate, a cold, heavy ache in my chest, but underneath, there was a thrum of satisfaction I couldn't ignore. 4 years, I'd lived in constant anticipation of their needs, always pushing aside my own comfort, telling myself that self-sacrifice was the right thing to do. I'd convinced myself that kindness and loyalty were their own rewards, that if I just gave enough, things would get better. But that night on the stairs, when Richard's anger finally boiled over and he shoved me, something inside me snapped. I realized, with a clarity that felt like betrayal, that kindness and loyalty mean nothing to people who only see you as a resource, a means to an end. I kept replaying that moment in my head, the way Richard's face twisted, the force of his hand. What about Richard pushing me? I asked Angela, my voice shaking as much from anger as from fear. He could have really hurt me. What if he tries again? We'll include that in the lawsuit, Angela said, her voice as steady as ever. She had a way of grounding me, pulling me back from the edge. You're not just evicting them, you're holding them accountable. It's time someone did. Let's make sure you get the justice you deserve. Justice. I'd never thought that word belonged to me before. The next few weeks blurred together in a storm of paperwork and sleepless nights. Angela and I dug through the mess Adam and Richard had left behind. Bank statements that showed the bleeding of my savings, receipts for repairs and groceries, screenshots of texts where their demands grew bolder and more entitled. Laying it all out was like performing an autopsy on my own hope. Every number, every angry message, was a reminder of how much I'd allowed myself to lose. For so long I'd gaslit myself into believing I was overreacting, that their complaints and manipulations weren't as bad as they felt. But the evidence was undeniable. Tens of thousands gone, years of my life spent tiptoeing around their moods, and nothing to show for it but exhaustion. Angela told me to write down what happened on the stairs, too. She said, "We need to show there's a pattern of abuse. This isn't just about money, Maya. It's about making sure you're safe." The word landed in my chest like a stone. I'd ignored my own safety for so long, dismissing my discomfort as oversensitivity, letting it slide in the name of keeping the peace. Now, for the first time, I was being asked to put myself first, to treat my safety as something worth fighting for. So I started making plans in secret. I found a tiny, cramped apartment near work. Nothing special, but it felt like a fortress. I moved my things a little at a time, ferrying them in the trunk of my car late at night, always glancing over my shoulder. Each trip felt both risky and exhilarating, a small act of rebellion. The house, once my home, felt more like enemy territory with every passing day. I did my best to avoid Adam and Richard. Adam barely registered my absence, lost in his own world, sprawled on the couch with the TV blaring and his father's voice rising in the background. Richard, on the other hand, grew angrier by the day, his resentment boiling over whenever I refused to give in, especially when I told him for the last time that I wouldn't buy him a car. Every conversation with him was like navigating a minefield, every word a potential trigger. But I stood my ground even when my hands shook. The final step was the legal bombshell. Angela drafted the eviction papers and a civil lawsuit for damages. Assault, financial exploitation, everything they'd ever taken from me. "They're not going to take this well," she warned, her eyes serious. "Be ready for backlash, Maya. People like this don't go quietly." "I'm ready," I told her. And I realized in that moment that I meant it. All the years of being pushed around had forged something hard in me. I was tired of being afraid. Keeping everything to myself was the hardest part. My coworkers noticed the dark circles under my eyes, the way I jumped at sudden noises, but I brushed them off with vague stories about stress at home. The truth was, I felt split in two. One version of me still playing the dutiful wife and daughter-in-law, keeping up appearances, and the other quietly, desperately reclaiming my own life behind closed doors. At night, in the safety of my tiny apartment, the anger and hurt would rise up and threaten to drown me. But I held on to the image of that final confrontation, Richard's arrogance shattering Adam's confusion, and it gave me the strength to keep moving forward. The day finally came. Angela met me outside the house, her presence steadying me as we walked up the driveway together. My heart hammered in my chest. The stack of legal papers in Angela's hand felt impossibly heavy, like it contained the sum of all my pain and all my hope. I could barely breathe as she rang the doorbell. Richard answered, his face already twisted in irritation. "What do you want?" he barked, as if I were some nuisance. Angela didn't even blink. "Mr. Williams, you've been served." She handed him the papers with an authority that left no room for argument. "You and your son have 30 days to vacate, and my client is filing a lawsuit for assault and financial exploitation." For a moment, Richard just stared at the papers in his hands, his face turning an alarming shade of red. "You can't do this," he sputtered, voice rising. This is my house. I forced myself to meet his gaze, even as my knees threatened to give out. No, I said, my voice shaking but clear. It's my house. You're not welcome here anymore. Not after everything. Adam stumbled into the hallway, rubbing his eyes, completely oblivious. What's going on? He mumbled, still half asleep. Richard shoved the papers at him, a mixture of anger and desperation in his voice. Your wife thinks she can kick us out. Can you believe this? Adam skimmed the documents, his confusion quickly morphing into disbelief. Maya, this is crazy. You can't just— I can, I cut him off, my resolve hardening. And I did. For a moment time seemed to pause. I watched as understanding finally began to dawn on their faces, the slow, creeping realization that things were different now, that the old rules no longer applied. Panic flickered in Richard's eyes. Adam's bravado crumbled. They were powerless, and they knew it. Angela touched my arm, gentle but firm. They've been served, she said, her calm voice carrying me through the storm. Let's go. Walking away from that house, I felt as if I'd shed a heavy, suffocating skin. Years of mistreatment, of bending myself into knots to please men who never saw me, started to fall away with every step. For the first time I felt free. Unmoored, uncertain, but free. I sat in my car across the street, hands shaking as I watched Angela deliver the final blow, and let myself breathe. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in forever I was the one writing the story. And I was never going back. She insisted on delivering the formal lawsuit and eviction notice herself, a decision that felt both symbolic and necessary. Angela said she didn't want me to have to face them alone again, not after everything. As she straightened the stack of legal papers in her hand, there was a quiet determination in her eyes. This was it. The moment I'd clung to in the darkest hours, the shift I'd imagined when I thought about what real freedom might feel like. Richard and Adam were finally about to understand the consequences of their actions, and maybe, just maybe, I would finally be free from the cycle they trapped me in. From my spot in the car, heart pounding, I watched Angela stride up the walk and press the doorbell. Her posture was unyielding, shoulders back, chin up, every inch the professional advocate who refused to be intimidated. The door swung open, revealing Richard. His expression flickered from the usual irritation. He hated being interrupted, to confusion and then to a red-faced, almost childish rage that I'd seen too many times before. Even with my windows rolled up, his voice carried, "This is ridiculous," he bellowed. His fists clenched at his sides like a tantruming child. "She can't do this to me. I've lived in this house for years. This is my home." Angela didn't so much as blink. Her voice was as crisp and cold as glass. "Mr. Williams, as I explained at our last meeting, this property is in Maya's name. You received your 30-day notice. Effective today, you are legally required to vacate. If you refuse, we will pursue further legal action and enforcement." Just then, Adam shuffled into view behind Richard, his hair unkempt, rubbing his eyes as if this confrontation was just another minor inconvenience. He looked at the legal documents Angela held out and groaned, the way he always did when responsibility came calling. "Maya, seriously, what is all this?" he whined, as though he hadn't been present for every argument, every warning, every opportunity to change. Angela's response was unwavering. "This is a civil lawsuit for damages. $20,000. That covers physical assault, financial exploitation, and the emotional distress you and Mr. Williams caused my client. These proceedings will move forward regardless of whether you comply today." Richard's anger boiled over, his face blotchy with rage. He snatched the papers from Adam, tore them in half, and hurled the pieces onto the porch. "You think this is going to scare me?" he spat, his voice shaking. "You can't evict family. This is my house. Always has been." Angela held her ground, not even looking down at the torn papers at her feet. "That's for the court to decide, Mr. Williams. The sheriff's department will be arriving shortly to ensure the eviction is enforced." Richard slammed the door with a force that rattled the windows. But before it shut, I caught a glimpse of Adam behind him, wide-eyed, slack-jawed, and for the first time truly afraid. I recognized in his face the dawning realization that this was no longer just another family argument, no longer something he could talk or whine his way out of. There was finality in the air, as cold and sharp as winter. Angela returned to the car, her steps measured, her presence a steadying force. She slid into the passenger seat and offered me a small, wry smile. "They're furious," she said, her voice low but confident. "But I doubt they'll be reckless. The sheriff will handle it from here." I let out a long, shaky breath, feeling my body finally begin to unclench. 4 years I'd lived in a constant state of tension, trying to keep the peace, tiptoeing around Richard's temper and Adam's lazy complicity. I'd given in again and again, letting their entitlement and manipulation erode my sense of self. Now, for the first time, I was holding the reins. The feeling was unfamiliar, almost fragile, but exhilarating in its own way. As we waited for the sheriff, I found myself picturing what was happening inside. Richard, no doubt, was pacing the living room, ranting about betrayal and injustice, searching for someone else to blame. Adam would be on the couch, hunched over his phone, scrolling mindlessly, pretending none of this was real. Their patterns were as predictable as clockwork. Richard shouting orders, Adam trailing behind, and me, always the one cleaning up their messes. But not anymore. That era of my life was finally closing. The sheriff's car pulled up, lights flashing but sirens silent. Richard burst out the front door, blustering toward the officers, his voice hoarse with outrage. "She's lying," he yelled. "This is my house. She can't just throw me out. I've lived here for decades. She's family." The lead officer barely acknowledged his tirade, calmly reviewing the documents Angela handed over. "Mr. Williams, the property is legally in Maya's name, and these eviction proceedings are valid. You've had proper notice. You are required to gather your belongings and vacate the premises. Please comply." Richard's fury reached a fever pitch, his voice cracking. "I won't. You'll have to drag me out." The desperation in his words was palpable. A man who'd built his life around control, suddenly finding it slipping through his fingers. Adam finally appeared, clutching a half-packed duffel bag, his posture defeated. He looked across the street at me, his face twisted with a mixture of confusion, resentment, and a hint of pleading. "Why are you doing this, Maya?" he called, his voice thin. "We're family." That word echoed in the air, heavy and weaponized. For so long they'd used it as a shield, a justification for every slight and abuse. Family was supposed to mean unconditional love and support, but for them it had become a license to take and take, never giving anything back. Not anymore. I stepped out of the car, feeling a calmness settle over me. I met Adam's gaze, my voice steady and clear. "Family doesn't push you down the stairs," I said, refusing to let old wounds close over the truth. "Family doesn't drain your bank account or make you feel like you owe them for simply existing. This house is mine. My life is mine. I'm not letting you take anything more from me." Richard shouted something from the porch, but I barely heard him. My focus was on Adam, who stood there for a long, suspended moment. For the first time, he didn't have a comeback, no glib excuse or half-hearted apology. He simply looked away, shoulders slumped, and slung the duffel bag over his shoulder. As he walked down the driveway, I saw the weight of finality settle on him. Richard, still railing against the officers, was ushered back inside to pack up his things under the sheriff's watchful eyes. Angela reached over, her hand warm and reassuring on my shoulder. "You did it," she murmured. "You really did. This chapter is closed." As Adam and Richard left the house for the last time, with the officers ensuring they didn't linger, I felt a surge of emotions, relief, pride, and a raw, sweeping sense of liberation. It wasn't just a legal victory. It was the reclamation of my own story. For years, I had allowed myself to be minimized, to accept their version of family that demanded my silence and sacrifice. Now, standing in the sunlight with Angela beside me and the house finally mine, I understood that I had broken free, not only from their hold, but from the version of myself who believed I had to endure it. As the moving truck pulled away, I watched the shadows of my past shrink behind it. I was no longer a bystander to my own life. For the first time I stood firm in my own power, and no one, not Richard, not Adam, not the twisted idea of family they clung to, could take that from me again. I turned to Angela, a small smile tugging at my lips, feeling the unfamiliar weightlessness of relief. "Let's go," I said. "I've got a life to rebuild." The words felt strange and powerful, as if by saying them I was drawing a boundary around my new beginning. Once Richard and Adam were gone, the house seemed to expand around me, every room echoing with possibility and silence. It was as if the walls themselves had exhaled. What used to feel confining and oppressive was suddenly vast and open. I wandered from room to room, touching the backs of chairs, trailing my fingers along the mantel, noticing dust motes floating in the late afternoon sun. Without their constant interruptions, their voices reverberating through the halls, I could finally hear my own thoughts. The home that had been a prison now seemed like a blank canvas, waiting for me to decide what would come next. Earlier, the sheriff had left, his presence lingering like a sharp wind after a storm. He'd shepherded Richard and Adam out, taking with him the last vestiges of their arrogance, their sense of entitlement. Richard had fought until the very last moment, his words tumbling out in a torrent of blame and outrage, insisting that he'd been wronged. But there was nothing left for him to grip. His anger fell flat in the empty foyer. Adam, on the other hand, barely spoke at all. He seemed diminished, a ghost of the man who once whispered promises in the dark. Watching him heave his battered duffel bag down the driveway, I felt a pang of sorrow. It wasn't anger that filled me, but a quiet pity at the way he'd let himself become so small. Angela stayed behind while I checked the locks, her quiet presence grounding me. "You've done something most people just can't," she said, her voice wrapping around me like a blanket. "It's hard to give up on people you've invested so much in, even when they've stopped deserving your care. But you did it. You chose yourself." Her words settled in my chest, heavy and comforting all at once. "I think I finally understand," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. It was never really about the money or the house, not entirely. It was about taking back control over my life. For years, I let them dictate everything. I let them convince me I didn't have a choice, that I was somehow obligated to keep giving until there was nothing left of me. But I don't owe them anything, not anymore. The days that followed were a whirlwind of small victories. I changed the locks first, the click of the bolt sliding into place sounding like a promise. I hired a cleaning service, watching as they scrubbed away years of grime and neglect. Every sweep of the mop, every spray of disinfectant felt like a step toward reclaiming my space. The physical cleaning mirrored the emotional work I was doing, clearing out the chaos and resentment they'd left behind. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could walk through my own front door and not feel like an intruder in my own life. People I hadn't spoken to in months started to reach out. Friends, co-workers, even distant acquaintances sent messages of support. They brought over casseroles and flowers, or just sat with me in the kitchen, letting the silence hang comfortably. Over coffee one afternoon, Lily looked at me with genuine admiration. "You're amazing for standing up for yourself," she said, her eyes shining. "Most people would keep sacrificing, keep justifying, but you didn't. You broke the cycle." I shrugged, feeling both proud and exposed. I just reached the point where I couldn't do it anymore. When Adam told me I should have given Richard the money, it was like a light switched on. They never really saw me. I was just a resource. I finally realized, I don't have to keep giving to people who don't care if I have anything left. Lily nodded, her hand warm on mine. "It's hard to see the truth when you're in the middle of it, but you're out now. That's what matters. You did the impossible." Richard and Adam attempted to reach me once by phone, but I let the call go unanswered, the screen glowing with their names before going dark. Angela reassured me that they had no legal recourse left. The courts were on my side, and the eviction and lawsuit were standing. "You've already won," she said, her confidence contagious. For the first time in years, I felt truly untouchable. Their power over me had evaporated, and I was free to imagine a future on my own terms. With their absence, my priorities shifted. I started scanning job boards, imagining what new roles I might take on, what kind of work would energize me. I unearthed old sketchbooks from the back of my closet and signed up for a painting class. Without their constant demands, my time felt like it belonged to me again. The idea of selling the house took root, a fresh start in a place without memories lurking in every corner. One evening, glass of wine in hand, I sat on the patio and allowed myself to reflect. The journey here had been grueling, marked by heartbreak and self-doubt. But each painful moment had taught me something about my own resilience. I had spent so long letting others define my value, shrinking myself to fit their expectations. Now, beneath the vast sky, I felt my heart open to the possibility of joy. For the first time in years, I felt free. This was my life, and I was finally living it on my own terms. Months passed, and the house underwent its own transformation. The walls, once scarred by arguments and slammed doors, were now painted in soft, calming colors. Sunlight streamed through windows that no longer had to be shuttered against shouting or slammed shut in anger. It stopped feeling like a monument to my past and became a testament to my future. Eventually, I put the house on the market, the decision feeling less like loss and more like liberation. Angela guided me through the labyrinth of legal paperwork and negotiations, her steady presence reminding me that I wasn't alone. The lawsuit against Richard moved steadily in my favor. The money was a relief, but the real reward was seeing him held accountable, knowing that his actions finally had consequences. That, more than anything, brought closure. In my new apartment, everything was lighter. My possessions, my routines, even my moods. I no longer carried the crushing burden of their expectations. I started practicing yoga in the mornings, feeling my body become strong and flexible again. I picked up a paintbrush, letting color and form express feelings I hadn't had words for. I booked a quiet weekend getaway to a coastal town I'd only ever dreamed about, letting the salt air and crashing waves wash away the last remnants of my old life. People noticed the change in me. "You look different," Lily observed during one of our coffee dates. "Like a weight's been lifted from your shoulders. You're glowing." I smiled, truly meaning it. It has. I used to think walking away meant giving up, meant I was weak for not holding on. But now I see it was the bravest thing I could have done. I chose myself. She raised her cup, eyes twinkling. To brave new beginnings. I touched my mug to hers, the sound ringing like a bell. To never settling for less, I agreed, the words a vow. Richard and Adam no longer haunted my thoughts. The memories of that last night faded, replaced by the certainty that I'd done the right thing. I stopped doubting myself, stopped replaying old arguments. Their attempts to make me feel small had only revealed my strength. In choosing to walk away, I had finally claimed my life as my own. Now, every day was a testament to my resilience, and every breath felt like freedom. I didn't need their apologies or explanations in order to move forward with my life. I'd already spent so much time and energy building something new for myself, a life that was entirely separate from theirs, untouched by their influence or approval. And honestly, that was more than enough. I had learned to rely on my own strength, to find comfort and meaning outside of the circles that once defined me. A few weeks later, the final judgment on the lawsuit arrived. Richard was held accountable and ordered to pay damages. Part of me had never really believed he would face the consequences for everything that happened, so the ruling felt significant. It was more than just a financial compensation. It was validation. It was tangible proof that what I'd endured mattered, that I wasn't invisible or dismissed as I had sometimes feared. The court's decision acknowledged my pain and my struggle, and in a way, it restored some of the dignity I'd lost along the way. On the day I handed over the keys to the new owners, I found myself standing alone in the empty living room. The silence was thick with memories, moments of anger, of heartbreak, of betrayal that had once seemed inescapable. They came rushing back, a flood of emotions I couldn't ignore. But as I stood there, I realized those memories no longer had the same hold over me. The pain was still a part of me, a scar rather than an open wound. I had reclaimed my life from the shadows of the past. In taking back my own narrative, I had discovered a version of myself I hadn't seen in years, stronger, wiser, and more compassionate toward my own journey. Stepping outside and closing the door for the last time, I was surprised by the calm that settled over me, a deep, genuine peace that I hadn't felt in such a long time. There was a sense of release, as if I was finally able to breathe freely. The future stretched before me, vast and open, no longer defined by old wounds or unanswered questions. Instead of feeling anxious or uncertain, I found myself filled with anticipation for what might come next. For the first time in ages, the unknown felt like an invitation instead of a threat, a canvas ready for new experiences and discoveries. This wasn't just the end of a difficult chapter. It was the beginning of something entirely my own. I was no longer living in the shadow of someone else's choices or mistakes. The story ahead was unwritten, and for the first time I was the one holding the pen.